Who will be the new Norwich City head coach? It's the question dominating the thoughts of Canaries fans after Daniel Farke's dismissal, and we'll do our best to bring you up to date with all the latest in the new PinkUn Norwich City Podcast. Dave Freezer here, coming to you in association with Future Radio 107.8 FM for episode 467 of the PinkUn Pod. Joining us is Paddy, Davitt and Southwell. We will reflect on Daniel Farke's exit, but I'd imagine most of you by this point have already listened to the live video that we brought you straight after the news was announced on Saturday night when we were still at the Brentford Community Stadium. Boys, how are we after a fairly frantic 24 hours? It's actually calmed down a bit, hasn't it, Pad?
Yeah, which isn't necessarily a good thing, Dave, because I think we'd all like to get to the point where we're not scanning various digital platforms for what feels like 23 hours in every 24-hour cycle, just until we get to the point where, bang, official confirmation, Norwich's new head coach is, and then we can crack on. This is always the way with these cycles. There's the initial warmth to the outpouring of the reaction to this particular head coach going, and that's more than fitting. And then obviously the actual announcement itself, and as you rightly say, Saturday evening, just hoping to get home and have a nice, quiet, relatively international period, and that went out the window. Thanks to that, Stuart Webber, as I told him in a text exchange. But and then obviously it'll pick up, and again we'll have another spike when, as I say, flippancy aside, they announce who the new manager is. But we're in that kind of sort of holding pattern now, really, where the calm before the storm, if you want to use that phrase, where the candidates, or at least the ones who most people think are the candidates, are out there. And now it just seems to be an endless stream of, I'd rather go for that candidate over this candidate, and just on and on and on, from pundits to supporters to odds compilers, who are probably the only ones who are quite happy the longer it goes, because they're probably the richer they get in terms of the money coming into their coffers for the next Norwich manager. But ultimately, I think as we sit here just before Wednesday lunchtime, we'll probably know. We'll be out for me anyway, put out of my misery by the weekend. I think that seems to be, speaking to the people at Norwich, what they're working towards. That was, to be fair, where they were sort of Monday, Tuesday. That hasn't changed. So unless events overtake us, then I think by certainly the start of next week, I think everybody will know who Daniel Farke's replacement is, and then the focus will shift then to Southampton and Carrow Road, and what an occasion that could be.
Yeah, then it's the feeling of a fresh start, isn't it? Like you say, the calm before the storm, but we didn't expect that calm to last too long, because the way that this unfolded, Connor, I think everybody's immediate assumption was that Stuart and the board would have somebody in mind and that they would be moving fairly quickly. But the way that things are going so far, that hasn't happened. And officials at the club are very much keeping their cards close to their chest and trying to keep the sort of the circle very tight on this, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and I guess you could argue that that's probably in their interest, given what we saw with Tottenham in the summer, where we had about must have been into double figures of names that were out there, at least linked with that vacancy, and in the end, it probably ended up being the one that maybe was, I don't know, 12th choice or something, and now they've sacked him 10 games later and got the one who's maybe first choice. So look, this is football. It's a weird game, and it's unfolded in a weird way. I mean, certainly for us, it's going to be difficult now to go back to Brentford without memories of Saturday, I think, irrespective of the game or the situation in the future. So yeah, there's that aspect. I mean, yeah, I think it's really interesting, this kind of, they must have, it's an automatic assumption, isn't it? Well, they must have someone lined up. And for sure, they probably did their due diligence. If there's a few candidates that they're speaking to, then that naturally takes a bit of time, and the international break does afford them that. So I don't know, it's difficult because everyone wants that decision to come quickly, but equally you kind of hope that they take the time to get it right, if that makes sense. So it's probably the conflicting things with the timescale. But realistically, the players aren't at Colney until Friday. So this week probably does give them a little bit of time to take stock, to reach out to people, to who knows, there may be an A list, a P list, or whatever, and they're working out whether certain candidates are actually interested in the job, and if they're not, then they can move on pretty swiftly. So there'll be a lot of processes that are going on, and as Paz said, they're confident of an appointment this weekend, and it's going to be absolutely fascinating, as I'm sure we'll get into, to see which direction they go in, because at the moment I would argue that the two favourites in terms of kind of bookmakers' odds are certainly different in terms of profile and maybe in terms of pedigree as well, both in terms of them being known and not being known. But this is an appointment that Stuart Webber absolutely has to get right, and Norwich City absolutely have to get right. So I think you prefer them to take their time to ensure that they reach or find the right person, rather than make a swift decision and get the wrong one.
Absolutely. Kjetil, Knutsen, Frank Lampard, Dean Smith. We'll come on to all of them shortly. In the here and now, as you mentioned, they're the players who aren't away on international duty. There are 11 who are away. They're back in training Friday and Saturday. At the moment, it'll be Head of Football Development Steve Weaver overseeing those things. And I would imagine that it's probably going to be a bit of a mix with the under-23s, because we've had the 3 backroom staff go with Daniel Farke, haven't we? Chris Domagala was Head of Performance. Christopher John was an analyst / first team coach, and Eddie Reamer, of course, was Daniel's assistant. So I'd imagine that the academy guys will pretty much step into that situation for the time being, and because that they know what they're doing in terms of running training sessions. Ed Wootton is still there as the goalkeeper coach as well. He was sort of kept separate to all of this. So I know where both of you boys were when you found out the news that Daniel Farke was going to be sacked, because you were stood right next to me and had pretty similar looks on your faces. But I didn't end up catching up with my dad until Monday night, and he didn't find out until match of the day. He actually turned off Canary Call and had a dinner, and they decided they were going to watch a film, and it finished just in time for match of the day. So he said, I'll watch match of the day, as we actually won a game. But at that point, he had no idea that Farke had gone, because I hadn't texted him, because obviously we were so busy, and I just assumed that he'd know. Things happen so immediately nowadays that I didn't think I really needed to. So then it was not until after the highlights and they get into the analysis with, what was it, Danny Murphy and Alan Shearer, I think, that my dad found out that the head coach had left. So I put this out on Twitter earlier to see if anyone could better it, really. Stuart Lewis said, I met my partner at Heathrow on Sunday afternoon as she returned from a trip. I'd sent her messages about Farke's sacking, but she hadn't seen them. She was elated about the win and wondered what I was going on about. A few other ones. Kev Parker, 73. It's mad to think back in the day, if you missed final score, that you wouldn't know the score until the papers came out the next day. You would ask in the pub and get about 5 different results back, depending on what time people got their latest update on the radio. I guess he's talking sort of pre-CFAX days there, which would sort of date us a bit anyway. Jenny Collins, I love that, Dave. Proper old school. At non-league matches, brackets with no scoreboard, fans who get there late get told the wrong score all the time. It's incredible. People missing a goal or not realising one was ruled out for offside. It happened last night at Hornchurch. Sid Sauer says he was at the cinema when he got a text from a friend. David Maidstone, my wife, said when bringing me Monday's evening news, you never said Farke had gone. And my favourite response, which came almost immediately, was from Craig Liam Jones, who said, what? Farke's been sacked? So, yeah. It's an immediate world, and we experienced quite a strange evening, didn't we, Pad, with the way we found out about it, and the way that, well, it just caught everyone by such surprise.
Well, I mean, we've obviously, we and every other media outlet and all the fans, with the benefits now of social media in terms of amplifying opinions and views and reactions. It's probably we're probably we've probably already digested the whole chain of events on that Saturday evening. But for me, it's just in the context of you've won the game, this elusive win at the 11th attempt in the Premier League, and for it then to come with such a juxtaposition, I think Shot probably doesn't overplay it. I mean, Andrew Obama-Daly is away with the Republic now, and he said that was his reaction, pure shock, when Stuart delivered the news to the squad shortly after he delivered it to Daniel, sadly, in the confines of the Brentford Community Stadium. So, yeah, and I think a lot of that isn't the Because if you take a step back, it felt like we were building to this kind of crescendo. I mean, post Chelsea, post Leeds, there was a growing constituency who felt time was up for Daniel. So I think wherever you stand in terms of Daniel as a person, as a man, as somebody who represented your football club, I think in the footballing context, based on what he hadn't done in the Premier League, not just this season, but 2 seasons ago, I think you could see why the chain of events led to what happened on Saturday night. But it's the manner of how it happened and the timing of it that seems very strange. I mean, ultimately, there's probably reasons why it had to be so immediate after the game, because it was an international period. It was about to embark, and you had 10 plus Norwich players scattering far and wide across the continent. So, in terms of the logistics around it, you've got them all in one place, both Daniel, his coaching team, and the players. It does make a lot of sense. But off the back of that elusive win and the manner of it as well, they had to dig in and show a lot of fight, spirit, commitment, all the attributes you wouldn't necessarily associate with a group of players who had, to use common parlance, down tools for the manager. That certainly wasn't the case. So, the vast majority of that playing squad was still behind the manager. And you saw that in the immediate aftermath. Very rare that a manager is sacked and you get quite a few of the players who played for him queuing up to wish him the best. And not just the younger end of the scale, the mentoring element of a Max Aarons or Omabama Daly or Ida, but even the guys like Tim Krul, Timu Pukki, Ben Gibson, certainly Gibson and Krul, he effectively rescued them from the footballing scrap heap, the wilderness. And for that universality of reaction, that tells you they didn't see it coming. And neither did we at 7:30, as it was confirmed on Saturday evening. But is it a shock that he's no longer the manager based on what he wasn't doing in the Premier League? No, I don't think it is. But for me, it's the timing. And I wrote about it Sunday and still feel the same shabby way to treat a man who delivered what he delivered, irrespective of whether the Premier League was a bridge too far or not. He deserved a better outcome than how it was delivered on Saturday evening. And I think that's been the tone of a lot of the reaction from the fan base, that on a human level, that wasn't the right way to go.
Yeah, agreed. But overall, I think it's the right decision. Hopefully, that's going to be dictated really by the decision that's taken now, isn't it? If they can bring someone in that provides a market improvement in results and an upturn in form and makes them competitive, and we see different patterns on the pitch from what has happened in that opening 11 games, because let's not pretend that they couldn't have lost that game in the second half at Brentford. They tanked pretty much in the second half and were just clinging on desperately, weren't they? Despite it being a good first half, but we'll come to the game a bit later. But yeah, for me, it's the right decision. And that's where we come into it then, Connor, with that big decision that awaits Stuart Webber. For him, it's kind of his reputation a bit on the line here at the moment as well, isn't it? That if he can get this right, if he can now manage to somehow inspire, make the right decision that inspires that team to survive in the Premier League, then he's going to be, he is already held in high regard, but he's going to be in demand pretty quickly, I think, isn't he? Because that is going to be, I don't think it's going to be a miracle, from everything that Daniel and Stuart had said in the build up to this season. They felt that they should have a legitimate chance of survival in the Premier League this year. And they clearly still do. They're only 5 points adrift with 27 games to play. If they did it, it's going to be a really, really exciting story. So let's bring in the names. Kjetil Knutsen, if I come to you on him first, Connor, because you've been able to do a little bit of background work on him, haven't you? And he's the man who's still second in the odds. I've got them in front of me here. So as of Wednesday, late morning, we've got Frank, this is Sky Bet, Frank Lampard, 8-15, Knutsen at 3-1, Dean Smith at 6-1, and then everyone else is pretty long. So, yes, this is a man who seems to fit the Webber profile, I think it's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, he does. He does. A really interesting coach at a really interesting club, I would say, and certainly ticks the box in terms of experience. He's been coaching for 15 years in Norway. He's had this job for 3 years. He's pretty much transformed Bodo Glimt from a club that bounced between the first and second division to Norwegian champions, essentially. He hasn't done that entirely on his own. There's a very strong network of young players. About 40% of their squad, I think, are either homegrown or from their academy. Matthias Normann used to play for Bodo Glimt. And with a really interesting style of play, someone that you would say is probably fits what Norwich want to do in terms of keeping possession, a 4-3-3 system by nature, but a very attack-minded one. It essentially becomes, I've got to do the maths here, a 2-1-4-3. That's 10, isn't it? Yeah. I think, but that's basically what I'm sure someone will tell me if I'm wrong, but if not, then you can work it out.
It's just a 4-4-2 in attack, isn't it? 2,
pretty much,
1,
yeah.
4-3, yeah.
So, yeah, basically. But he's quite progressive, quite modern, very good with young players. Has developed a lot of them. Of course, Bodo Glimt, the club that beat Jose Mourinho's Roma 6-1 in Europe last month, which kind of brought them into the mainstream a little bit. So. Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting coach, you would say, given Stuart Webber's track record of plucking, maybe, I don't want to say unknown, because I think that's probably a little bit disrespectful to him, to be honest, because he's of what he's achieved at that football club, but maybe lesser known, you would argue, and certainly on these shores of a coach, he would tick that box. And I think he's got people quite excited by all accounts because of all of those elements and the job that he's done there. Whether those sort of skills are transferable to the Premier League, I suppose, is probably a different debate. A little snippet that I'll give people: if it is to be him, his current assistant manager used to be a fighter pilot in Afghanistan. So that's another story in itself. I think he describes him as kind of like a mental skills coach, which is really interesting. But he's an interesting one. And I think he's going to be highly sought after because of the job that he's done at Bodo Glimt. I mean, you did a story today, Dave, about Rosenborg in Norway. I'm sure there'll be countless others as well. But a really interesting head coach who's basically transformed a club that was a yo-yo team by all accounts, if you want to use that term, I suppose, into a real powerhouse and arguably the best team in Scandinavia.
Yeah, so if he comes in, we can expect Norwich to win the Premier League title, to beat Roma 6-1 in Europe. It's just
exactly that.
It's going to be nice and easy, yeah.
That
was the heaviest defeat of Jose Mourinho's career. That's a real feather in his cap, isn't it? He has got an impressive CV, and it does seem to fit the model, as I said earlier. And we did a poll, as we tend to do, at PinkUn.com. We got over 7,000 people take part in the end. And we just kept it to those three candidates that I've mentioned, Knutsen, Lampard and Smith. And then we did give the option of other, but only 6% went for that. And we asked people to suggest names. And I think the only ones really were Roy Hodgson, Lucien Favre, and there was someone else, but it doesn't come to mind. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. But Knutsen came out top with 46% of over 7,000 votes, which is a very good sample size, obviously. And then Lampard not far behind in 38%, and Dean Smith only with 10%. So, Pat, if I come to you on Lampard, he's kind of the maybe not polar opposite to Knutsen, but he's more of a traditional high-profile appointment, isn't he? The sort of person where you would hope that he's going to inspire the players and his reputation will do a certain amount of sort of his duties. But I should probably just emphasise again, as we did say earlier, that Norwich are keeping everything very, very close to their chest, aren't they? So we still don't know for certain that these two are the sort of main candidates. That's from everything that we can work out at this stage. But we know how Stuart Webber operates. I still wouldn't be at all surprised if he had a wild card up his sleeve that he's just going to pull out that nobody's expecting at all.
That wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. Yeah, I mean, you only have to go back to his transfer activity in relative recent windows. You know, I don't think there was too many who knew who Shemi Poeta was before he came through the door, et al. So that is always something. Exactly, yeah. Emi Buendia, we don't need to go there. But I think it does seem to be indicating, or does seem to be pointing to the two we've mentioned already on the podcast. So for me, you've got Knutsen would be as kind of rightly mapped out, the one who seems the perfect overlay onto, because essentially a lot of what he does is what Daniel Farke did, or certainly came with a reputation of doing. And so as a fit to the model, as a piece in the jigsaw, he looks far better suited than a Frank Lampard. But then Frank Lampard, because as you referenced there, what a name he is in the game, what a reputation, and the instant respect he would command inside that Norwich dressing room. And ultimately, let's go back to Saturday night and the club statement. Stuart Webber's comments in that club statement, this decision, we feel, has been made to give us the best chance of retaining our Premier League status. So that is, in the here and now, the priority. End of. It is retaining their status. Otherwise, they persevere with Daniel Farke. They go back down to the Championship and they have a double title winning coach at that level. So if the priority is these next 27 or so games, whoever comes in will need to immediately hit the ground running. And if you're Frank Lampard and you walk into that dressing room next week, hypothetically, then there's not a player in there who would look at him and think, I've got a better career going than you, because he was a stellar player for club and country. 106 caps, I think he had for England. He won everything with Chelsea, Champions League. I think he won the Europa as well, off the top of my head. Multiple titles at Premier League level. And alongside Gerrard, probably the best two central midfielders, Paul Scholes, you'd probably have to throw in there as well, of their generation. An absolutely phenomenal player and a professional as well, because I don't think he was blessed necessarily with maybe the innate skills of a Scholes or a Gerrard, but he made the most of his career. He extracted everything. You obviously read about these players and the anecdotal evidence. He was just voracious. His attitude to training, on the training ground, honing his skills, that mindset, that drive are all skills that I'm sure he's brought into his management. So that, to me, would be immediately make sense. But I just think beyond the initial uplift, is his coaching career to date one that would fill you with confidence that he could, in a mid to longer term setting, be the right person? You could argue, yes, when he went to Derby, he did show a lot of faith with young players. Principally some of those lads he got from Chelsea, Tomori and Mason Mount, who were part of his Derby team that he took all the way to the Championship playoff final. So, yes, it looks like he does believe in young players. And of course, when he got into the Chelsea job, who did he first pull through? Billy Gilmour, who we know for various reasons it hasn't worked out so far under Daniel Farke at Norwich. But I don't think you could argue Frank Lampard's credentials in terms of backing young players. But there's too many. For me, there's a lot of imponderables about what type of coach is he? Because we haven't enough of a body of evidence really. He had that 1 season or 2 seasons or so at Derby, and then thrown straight in probably too early at Chelsea. Where he's a legend, but it still didn't save him from obviously getting pulled out the firing line at the start of the year. So it's a really, really interesting dynamic if you just study those two, who would appear to be the front runners. Yes, while accepting there may be others under the radar that we haven't maybe seen mentioned too much. And if you're Stuart Webber, I'm not sure which way you go. Do you tip towards the Frank Lampard walks through the door? There's a good chance he's going to get a tune out of these players in the short term, and it's the short term where it needs to happen, particularly with the next run of winnable games starting with Southampton. But then, that new manager bounce, once the shine or the allure wears off, if it hasn't happened, then has he got the experience? Because ultimately, there's one thing we do know definitively: Frank Lampard has never managed in a Premier League relegation scrap. And that's where he finds himself, ultimately, if he takes on this role. So that has to be the huge question mark. Does he have the experience in the role for the situation he's going to inherit, hypothetically? So, as we understand it, I mean, there was a report earlier in the week that he'd actually met the Norwich board. I think it was Monday night. Well, that was Jack Canary. That hasn't happened. But we do believe there has been talks with him and his advisors, and whether they progress further. Well, as I say, we're here Wednesday afternoon. Things will play out in due course. But I think with Lampard, what isn't helping is the Villa situation. The fact that Dean, and that might segue nicely into the Dean Smith line, but because there is let's be honest, probably a more attractive job in the Premier League currently available. Yes, it looks like Steven Gerrard may be, a very, very warm order to take on that role. But the fact that if you're Frank Lampard and you're sitting there, and yes, you may have made overtures in terms of the Norwich position, but if Villa is still there as well, I'm sure, and Harry Redknapp on TalkSport yesterday morning said categorically Villa is a job that would interest his nephew. So, that muddies the waters a little bit for me until the Villa position is resolved. Then if you're Frank Lampard, you're going to hang fire and see what happens in that area. And if you're Norwich, you can't really allow it to sort of lap into next week, because ultimately, they have a massive game on the horizon against Southampton. And the earlier ideally this week, but the earlier next week that person is in position, the better I think they are to go out and get a result, which they need to do against Southampton at Carrow Road.
Yeah, one nice stat which I noticed from Who Scored is that Lampard faced Norwich 15 times as a manager and a player, has never lost. 11 games as a player, 8 wins, 3 draws. He was on the pitch for when Zola scored that goal in the FA Cup. And what was that, 2001, I think it was? 2002. He scored in that game as well when Zola scored that famous back heel flick in the FA Cup replay. 4 goals, 5 assists. So he enjoys playing against Norwich. As a manager, Norwich drew at Derby, didn't they? It was the 4-3 chaos in the home game when the floodlight went off. And then, the Chelsea won both of the games under him 2 seasons ago as well. So, yeah, he was obviously a top player. And I do wonder whether in the circumstances, the whole long-term plan and the way that you're putting a philosophy in and stuff, just in the here and now just doesn't matter. If you have to make a change again next summer, then so be it. For the here and now, I just wonder whether Stuart Webber is thinking, no, we've got to go for someone who has actually got Premier League experience, who actually is going to command the respect of the players straight away, because there is no time for messing around. You can't give the new manager, 6, 7, 8 games to really get their feet under the table. Norwich have got to hit the ground running. They've got to get new manager bounce, and they've got to start getting some upward trajectory and showing that their heads are above water on the pitch very quickly. Let's come to Dean Smith then, Connor, because that did, as Pad says, give a new complexion to everything on Sunday when Villa pulled the trigger as well. I think it's 5 successive defeats for them, wasn't it? They've had injuries. Things just haven't quite worked out for them. Obviously, they lost Grealish in the summer and things like that, despite being a Villa fan. I think for me, I don't know what you think, he seems like a decent candidate, but a bit like with Knutsen, because Knutsen still needs 2 wins to seal the title with Bodo Glimt, doesn't he? He's still in Europe. I think because they've played Roma twice, haven't they? So they've got the 2 smaller teams in that group, so they could get into the knockout stages of that. So does the timing work for him? Similarly, Dean Smith, I guess, is a bit like Steve Bruce. He's just come out of a real bruising situation. Is he going to want to go straight back into things?
Yeah, and it's very rare, isn't it, that you see a manager sacked one week and walk straight into a job the week after. In fact, I'm struggling. I've been trying to think about this for a while. I'm sure there are examples, but I'm struggling to think certainly of any recent high-profile examples of a coach being sacked and then walking into a job 7 days later. So for that reason alone, I think this is unlikely, which in many ways is a little bit of a shame, because I think Dean Smith is a very good coach by all accounts. Clearly, the Villa situation, I think, as Paddy said earlier, it's a really attractive job for somebody to go and achieve. It was always going to be difficult after they lost Grealish and spent a lot of money. When you spend money, expectations go up, irrespective of which players have walked out of the door. So, yeah, I just think it comes too soon. I think he'll probably want to spell out of management, and I think if we're talking about Norwich doing due diligence and sort of knowing which direction they wanted to head in before they removed Daniel Farke from his post, and Dean Smith wouldn't have been available at that point. So I think it would have to be Norwich would have to really like Dean Smith, and Stuart Webber would have to really like Dean Smith to deviate away from maybe their original plan. I would say I could see why he would fit, and I could see why there would be an attraction to him. I think it's just whether the timing lines up. I think if Dean Smith would have been sacked a month or so ago, then this debate might be a little bit different, but I don't see it at the moment. And just to kind of pick up on the chat that you guys were having around Lampard, I suppose, and you can include Smith in this as well, I suppose it kind of broadens it out a little bit, because Norwich are very keen, and we know this, to send out a message that actually they want to stay in the Premier League. That's why they sacked Daniel Farke. For me, just to maybe play devil's advocate with an appointment, maybe of an obscure coach, if I'm a player walking into Colney on Monday and you've got the choice between Knutsen or Lampard, which one is going to make you sit up and go, okay, this club is serious about staying in the Premier League? It's Frank Lampard, isn't it? I think if you're essentially plucking a coach out of somewhere and then saying to Premier League footballers, right, he's going to be the guy that's going to mastermind your survival, and they all go, well, who is he? Then I think that may be a little bit of a problem. But who knows? Only the players that could answer that themselves. And I think the whole debate probably shows where Norwich are at the moment as well, because the 3 candidates that we're talking about all have flaws, and that's undeniable, with Knutsen, it's probably experience, certainly in English football, in the Premier League. With Lampard, it's, well, what is he as a coach? Is he good enough? We as Paddy said earlier, we don't have a big enough body of evidence. And with Dean Smith, well, what was behind those failures at Villa? Was it him? Was it the fact that he had quite a few injuries? Was it Jack Grealish, actually, who brought them a lot of success? There are a lot of questions. And I think when Norwich City are at the moment, where they're certainly not in the top tier of recruiting for a manager, they're probably not in the second tier either. They're probably in the tier below that. So I think any appointment that comes is probably going to have things that people look at and go, oh, I don't quite like that, or I don't quite like that. And I guess it's in many ways similar to the recruitment of a player. It's kind of the position that Norwich City are in now. You're almost looking for potential, aren't you? So I think it's really interesting. I've got a funny feeling, as we were kind of debating earlier, that we don't actually know the name of who it is yet. But I can certainly see why all three would make sense in different kind of situations. And I think in many ways, all of them would mark a slight change in what Norwich City are trying to do. Dean Smith, I think is probably the unlikeliest of the three, purely because of timings, to be honest.
I think if Norwich had just been relegated back to the Championship, he would be absolutely perfect. But I'm not sure about this situation. Maybe. But with Lampard, I feel like there's an element of, if that was who they went for, that's almost sending a message of, there's no more little old Norwich. This manager isn't going to be talking about, because that people got annoyed with Daniel, didn't they, towards the end, about how he was almost become Houghton-esque in terms of bigging up everyone else. He's been too nice, wasn't he? He was not sending out enough of a sort of steely attitude. Although, actually, I think he often was saying the right things, Daniel, but I think they tended to get lost because he would go on at length in his answers, and he would sort of say both things. And he would say, yes, we want to go there and be greedy for goals and show our spirit and show that we want to. But he would also say things along the lines of, that Brentford are such a good side. And that element of still being little old Norwich is where they need to shake off, isn't it? If they really want to be in the Premier League. And as we've said in previous pods, or certainly I've said, it's this season is just massive as a self-funded club, isn't it? We'll have the AGM coming up soon. The shareholders will have the opportunity to quiz the owners and things like that. If they can just survive that one first season as a club who are self-sufficient, it totally changes the game in terms of what you're able to do financially. And then you start to build, and then you can start to think about whether you can put another tier on the City stand, for instance, whether you can put in safe standing, all those things which are a little bit on hold. The next stage of the club development, that's where they need to head towards.
Welcome to the new normal.
Hello, and welcome to this series of Unfinished with me, Charles Thompson.
Welcome to Weird Norfolk.
Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast.
From true crime to football, politics to folklore, for more great podcasts from Archant, head to audioboom.com/channel/Archant.
Newcastle have also appointed Eddie Howe. We should say that has been in the works for a little while. Briefly, Norwich were off the bottom of the table and the richest club in the world were bottom. But they then got their draw at Brighton, which moved them back above. So we shall see how Eddie Howe does things there. But, Pad, I just wanted to come back round to Daniel, really, because we all had a lot of experience with him, and there's a lot of warmth. There's been an outpouring of love almost for him. And I suppose that's partly because people were feeling a little bit sorry for how he was dealt with. But you probably interviewed him more than anyone, perhaps maybe other than Chris Gorham. You and Chris probably are certainly the two out in front, and you will have interviewed him in all sorts of different scenarios. I remember us being in his office when he signed his contract. Was it before the Hull game in 2019? And chatting to him there, and obviously pre-season and things like that. So all sorts of weird and wonderful locations. But in general, just as a man, he was great to deal with, wasn't he? And he was as sort of decent and nice as he was off camera as he was on camera.
Yeah, no, he wasn't one of those who turned it on when there was a Sky camera, for example, in his face, and he was sweetness and light, and then a bit of a tyrant off camera. There might be one or two Norwich players currently who dispute that version of Daniel Farke, but just as you were talking about locations, I'll tell you the most bizarre location I interviewed him was on a pre-season tour where it was before a training session. We'd set up like a kind of, he was in a single chair, I was in a single chair, but bizarrely, I don't know why this came to pass. It was directly behind the goal that like Pookie and that are doing their pre-training warm-up. So basically, you've got Pookie et al. Firing balls into the goal, and not all of them. Maybe in the current climate, this isn't a surprise. Not every ball on target was going on target. They were getting fired out. And when I say just behind, I mean literally just behind the goal.
Me and the coaches formed like a wall, didn't we?
Yeah, it was like an overflow area.
Daniel.
Yeah. So, I mean, to be fair, when we started the interview, they hadn't actually come out onto the training pitch, but very soon it became apparent. And then Daniel had his back. The worst of it was I could see it because I was facing the goal, but Daniel had his back to the goal. So he had no idea, A, what was happening, B, who was taking pot shots. But either side, I could see very nervous coaches fearing what could happen if, Pookie skied one, it landed on the back of Daniel's head. So suffice to say, that interview got ended pretty quickly. So that was the most bizarre. But all joking aside, what a fantastic man to deal with on a interpersonal relationship level. Yeah, I mean, when things aren't going well, and thankfully there wasn't too much of that really. The 2 championship title winning seasons, it was pretty universal sort of support towards the guy and his team and what he had achieved. Premier League era, well, I think that kind of got overtaken by this pandemic that obviously first developed midway through and the whole project restart period. So there wasn't really too much that you could ultimately get into about. And even this 10, 11 games, where we've had to be fairly strident in certain situations. We had an interaction with him Sunday night, within 24 hours of the decision being made. And the fact that he would proactively send us messages is a measure of the man, given how disappointed and upset and probably hurt he still was feeling. But even within that, about how we'd covered him and the club, he always felt was fair, and there was respect on both sides. And as I say, not just in terms of media, but the fan base. That you can't fake that. You can't fake the reaction for the vast majority of the fan base in terms of the emotions he stirred and the feelings and the memories, the fantastic memories that he will have left those set of fans in the last 4.5 years. And even if it, it ended as it did, the fact that, he went out with a win, celebrating with his players, celebrating with those away supporters, those lucky few at Brentford. I think that was entirely fitting because he certainly deserved at the very least that. And I would imagine when the dust settles, at the right time, when he does return to Carrow Road, he will get a reception befitting the legacy and the impact he had on fans, and he deserves that at the very least, because ultimately it wasn't words, it wasn't playing to the gallery, he wasn't trying to curry favour. When he talked about the affinity and the attachment he had to this place, his second home, how he bled yellow and green, how he actually turned down offers, particularly after the 2 title wins. There were other clubs who wanted to take him because his star was on the rise, but no, he still felt he had unfinished business here at Norwich, and he rejected those overtures. And a very special individual, and he was good for Norwich, and Norwich were good for him as well. And you would imagine, despite how it's ended this season, his stock and his CV is sufficient that probably back in the Bundesliga he should get himself a very good job, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing Daniel pop up at Ipswich somehow. But I mean, he's not solely responsible for it, and obviously didn't get everything right. For as good as he was when Wes left and Tete and Francis left, there were some players that it went completely badly with. Obviously, we've had Cantwell recently that seems to have pretty much turned sour, but Leitner, Dermich, even Steedman a little bit maybe. As much as he was a nice guy, he didn't take any nonsense either. He was always very tough on the players, right from, I remember in that first season, like when Max Aarons first got into the team, he was always on Max and he was always on Todd. He was, that's to me always seemed like where his real passion was, in developing the young players, and that's what he really found satisfying. But when he came up maybe against sometimes the players with the bigger egos and a bit more swagger and things, maybe that's where he wasn't quite as comfortable. But yeah, it was almost, to me, it felt like a cultural revolution, and it feels like that 2018-19 season almost feels like ancient history already, because we've just gone through that kind of agonizing behind closed doors season where obviously on the pitch the achievements were so special and were record breaking in many ways, but because the fans weren't there, it is not ever going to be remembered in the same way. And Connor, that season in particular was very special. But I always go back to right at the start, right, that first game at Fulham. Nelson Oliveira takes off his shirt and does the stupid thing that he did, which basically sealed his fate as a Norwich City player under Daniel Farke eventually. They probably should have just got rid of him immediately, because it was pretty disgraceful what he did to the guy in his first job, for having the temerity to bring him on as a substitute so he could score an equaliser. But that first press conference after it really set a tone, didn't it? When he said, it's not about the name on the back of the shirt, it's about the badge on the front. And all those lengthy monologues where it's talking about Angus Gunn having legs like Kate Moss, or his various analogies that he went off on, his character is what really went to the heart of Norwich fans, I felt.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's probably why you've seen the reaction that we've seen that's been so warm. I think it's probably rare for a manager or a head coach to get sacked and there be such an outpouring of love and lots of memories to take along the way. It's a rarity in football, to be honest, that anyone leaves a club and on such a positive note, I suppose. And as Paddy said, there's a nice ending. I think the fact that he ended in front of the away fans, doing the waves that we've all come to know and love. And yeah, I mean, he was. I mean, we've got to remember the position that he inherited, that he picked up. Norwich City were just had a season of underperformance really under Alex Neil. They were going in a new direction. He had an aging squad. He had to deal with the fact that there wasn't a lot of money. He had to produce young talent almost immediately, really, because of the financial climate. Wasn't overly happy with the Alex Pritchard decision, and so I think he's had some difficult situations and difficult stuff to deal with during his time, but I think he probably made Norwich City fans believe again. I think that's probably fair to say, and he's probably changed maybe people's outlook on football. I know he's certainly changed mine in terms of how maybe you have to look at it in a bit more of a long-term view, certainly sort of season by season, how everything isn't defined by one game. I think he's I mean, Paddy summed him up as a man, but as a coach, the way he implemented how he saw football. And I always think that the best coaches in football have kind of the perfect game in their head. And it's just about making the players believe in what they're trying to do. And he made the vast majority of players that worked under him believe in what he was trying to do. And as Paddy said, we saw that right to the end at Brentford, who, even though you could maybe question the direction in which the style had gone, there was no change really in terms of commitment or energy or work rate or kind of commitment to him as well, I suppose. He'll go down as one of Norwich City's greatest coaches for sure. Probably a debate for another day, really. But he certainly leaves the club in a better position, and it's going to be it's a massive job now for whoever takes it on, and it's going to be really important that they try and connect with supporters and people in the same way that he did, I think, because as he showed, I think it's a really key part of this job. And I'm in no doubt that he will end up with a very good job, either back in Germany if he wants it, or if he wants to remain in England. Then I think that there are probably quite a few championship clubs that would be willing to look at him and the work he's done and the football he's implemented on a budget. So his stock is high, but probably, I would say, probably the right decision for all parties. I think we would all agree on the evidence of the opening 11 games, including the Brentford victory, that there wasn't enough in performances, results to suggest that this season would be any different. And yeah, he could have turned it around and Norwich could have completed a great escape, but I think Cud's doing a lot of heavy lifting in those statements, to be honest. So probably the right time for all parties. And when he does return to Carrow Road, he'll get providing he isn't managing Ipswich, of course, he'll get a reception befitting of his achievements for sure.
Yeah, I think my happiest memories of them are actually, I was lucky enough to go over to Tampa, wasn't I? And that when they had that warm weather break midway through the 18-19 title winning season. So it was just after the 4-3 against Millwall. And then when they came back, they went and won 4-1 at Swansea. But I was there for the meal and stuff that they had on the opening night. And Kevin Keelan was there, who was obviously Norwich City royalty. But I think I'm saying he's about late 70s, mid 70s, something like that. And hadn't been involved in the Norwich City sphere and stuff for quite a while. But this is the guy who made the record all-time appearances. It's nearly 700 appearances for Norwich, wasn't it? And the way that Daniel spoke to him and dealt with him while he was there, it showed that Daniel just got it. He knew that guy was important to Norwich fans. He had no idea who Kevin Keelan was, obviously. But he knew that whether it's Kevin Keelan or Wes Hoolahan, that those people are very important to the supporters, and he treated them with the utmost respect. But the next morning, I interviewed him in the reception of their hotel, and he came down and he hadn't seen me at that meal because there was hundreds of people at the meal the night before. And he came to walk towards me and he was like, what are you doing here? Like, he had no idea that they meant it was an EDP reporter from home. He just thought he was going to be speaking to a local reporter or something from whatever, the Tampa News or something. So that was good fun. And then the fans who were actually at the open training sessions and stuff, the way he dealt with everyone, like the Bowles family, for instance, were there with Jacob, and they had their banner, and which had I think it was a cartoon of Farke drinking a stein of beer and things like that, and he was so happy to pose for photos and all that sort of stuff. He got that element of fandom, I think, and maybe that's German football for you. Maybe they just appreciate supporters that little bit more. But yes, it's going to be fascinating to see where Daniel pops up, and fascinating to see how he gets on. But as Connor mentions, Paddy, they actually won a game of football in the Premier League, which it's been quite a long while, isn't it? That performance, the first half performance, I think it's fair to say that when we reached half time, we were all finding it a little bit surreal, weren't we?
Yeah, that's safe to say. And knowing Norwich as we do, the second half wasn't entirely unforecasted. I think it's, now I think about it in the context of what happened after the game, not 100%, but that first half, that was in the goals particularly, the quality of the goals, the first goal from Normann, but also the initial run from Rashica, and then the second goal, not the penalty clearly, but that pass from Normann splitting two centre backs for Pukki to run on in behind. That was what Daniel was saying prior to the game. We need to get back to something approaching the DNA, was the phrase he used. And isolated incidents, yes, but that was kind of you could almost take out Normann and put Emi Buendia in to play that pass for the build up to the penalty. So there was elements in that first half. I wouldn't say the entire first half was peak Daniel Farke DNA and Norwich at their most attacking, vibrant best, but there was enough evidence of that in the first half. And of course, you walk off the pitch, you're 2-0 up. That underlines that you've had a very good half of football. But obviously the second half then, in the context of, could this guy over the entire piece do enough to engineer results in the Premier League? That was a grim, backs to the wall, clinging on to what they had. And that said, and he said it himself in his final interview after the game, at 2-0, Brandon Williams, who was very good on the day, back to the levels he showed against Arsenal, I thought. Brilliant counter-attacking burst early in that second half, squares it to Pukki, drags an angled shot just wide of the far post. If that goes in 3-0, then, it's a completely different half of football. The Brentford colours would have been lowered, I think, at 3-0, and then maybe Norwich would have gone on and won even more handsomely. And can you now imagine if Stuart was still intent on win, lose or draw, doing what he did, if that had come off the back of a 4 or 5-0, that would have given nothing to the reaction of surprise that we'd have got on the back of that type of result. But that's an aside. But
I don't think you could have done it, could you? I think you'd have had to have at least left it for a couple of days.
Difficult, yeah, very difficult. Yeah, I mean, that took some explaining to do, no doubt about it. But as it turned out, that chance didn't go in. Brentford got themselves back in, and then it was certainly 20-25 minutes after the goal. That was pretty ferocious. I think that I felt they ran out of ideas a little bit and ran out of steam a little bit. And worth pointing out, that's their 4th straight defeat. So for all the kind of, and that didn't do Daniel any favours a few weeks ago, where Brentford have started so well and Watford to a lesser extent, but still far more points on the board. Norwich go to Chelsea and get whacked 7 the week after. Brentford had probably deserved something from Chelsea, albeit that was at Brentford, but, only got beat 1-0. And I think Chelsea's keeper, Mendy, was the man of the match in that game. So, it just underlines the shift in plates that, you've gone into an international break. And, I was in Thomas Frank's post-match media, and it surprised me because obviously we don't cover Brentford that closely, only when Norwich come up against them. But the tone of a lot of the questioning was, they're on the slippery slide, and how does he arrest it? Not that you've got 12 points from 11 games. What a great start, something to build on. I think there's genuine concern, certainly in the media, around that club, that they might be maybe drawing a parallel with Norwich 2 seasons ago. They've had that great start. Everything's so exciting, so fresh. They've attacked it. They've continued their momentum from the Championship. And now they've hit a very rocky spell in terms of results. And then it'll be interesting for me to see how Brentford respond the other side of the break. But ultimately, Norwich did win that game of football. They did hang on, but that second half would have been a bit of a cause of concern, I think, because at 2-0, having been so good and so compact without the ball, the shape was working. Normann in a deeper lying role. We know he's not an Ollie Skip, but he was doing a good passable impression. They got Rashica higher up the pitch, and he looked a lot better for that. Williams was bombing on. Pookie had players around him, and I think taking Sargent out for me was transformed how they looked in that final third. With Sargent, as we saw against the Leeds game particularly, I think the danger is they just try and hit him and play second balls, and that's certainly not how Norwich want to operate with this group of players. So there was a lot of pleasing things in that first half performance, but the nature of the second half did kind of just bring you back down to earth a little bit, that possibly Daniel wouldn't have been able to sort of, turn it around to the extent they need to now over these next period of games. So, yes, a win, but I think anybody who left that game thinking that Norwich have turned a corner and everything is going to be honky-dory from now, I think that would be slightly overplaying what we saw in the second half, because, the second half as a template isn't going to get you too many results in this league, because Brentford banged away. Tim Krul made 1 or 2 excellent reaction stops. They rode their luck in a few other situations, but against better teams in this league, they would have got punished in that second half. So, maybe we saw the two sides of Norwich. That first half, a little bit more how we associate Daniel wanting his teams to play. And then the second half, more of the struggles they'd had in the previous 10 games, I think.
And how important getting in the lead as well. They're just 6 minutes in, that obviously had such a big impact on them. Connor, we'll come on to Todd Cantwell and Billy Gilmore, but I'm sure probably in the next pod, as we look ahead to what the new man's got to deal with. And it's going to be really interesting to see what he makes of the squad. For instance, Sargent, Ida, Pookie, everyone's sort of got that blank piece of paper, haven't they, that to get into training and really impress and show that, well, no, I'm the frontline striker that, I'm Brandon Williams. I'm from Manchester United. I'm the best left back at this club. They've all got their opportunity to show what they can do. Probably the one person that we can guarantee is still going to be in the team, maybe other than Tim Krul, will be Matthias Normann, isn't it? Because he is now, to me, it feels like he's becoming a leader. It's like he's absolutely loving things. And we all knew that goal was coming, didn't we?
Oh, he's great, isn't he? He's a really good footballer. You're right. He's probably deserved that for a few weeks. He's the Burnley free kick comes to mind. He's had a few. There was one at Everton, wasn't there, that was quite close. For a few games, he's looked the most likely player to score for Norwich City. So not a great shock. And actually, it's funny that the goal comes from a strike that he looked slightly off balance and didn't quite look like he hit it the way he wanted to hit it. So but I mean, the goal aside, as Pad mentioned, his defensive work was outstanding. I think he offers so much to that team from a defensive perspective. Got the quality to play the type of pass that we saw him slot through for Teemu Pukki for the second. He can do it all, and I think irrespective of what Norwich City managed to do this season, if they're not in the Premier League next season, I'd be shocked if he wasn't, because there's been a few times that we've been in grounds this season, and you've just seen people kind of make a note of him mentally, of what he's doing and the quality he has. And no doubt there'll be people watching Norwich City's games doing exactly the same, because there's, with the exception of maybe Chelsea, where everyone had a really bad afternoon on that occasion. He's been really good in every game since he's come in, and I'm still not fully convinced that he's absolutely 100% fully fit. So it's Norwich fans know when a loan player arrives that you've got to be very careful not to kind of fall for them a little bit. But he's making that awfully hard, I think, because of his performances and the quality that he provides. And I think, increasingly as we look to whoever is next, for all the talk's going to be about Billy Gilmore and Todd Cantwell and Schollis, I guess, to some extent, and where all these parts fit in, he looks like someone who has to be in there. He looks like someone who has to be a constant of whoever the next man's team looks like, and he has to be at the heart of it. And I would be shocked if we got to Southampton and beyond and he isn't an integral part of this team. And obviously then the conversation turns to whether Norwich City can stay in the Premier League, and a massive bonus of them doing that would be that they could keep him on a permanent basis, and it would be lovely to watch him play football every week, to be honest. So that would be really nice. But a top player, certainly on the evidence so far, the pick of their summer recruitment, I would say.
So that's very much hope that he survives his Norway duty, because he is back with them, isn't he? And they've got important games. He's one of 11 Norwich players away on international duty. You've got Rashica, Aarons, Ida and Omar are with Ireland. Yanulis and Jolis, Greece play Spain. They've got to win that one if they're to have any chance of qualifying. McLean and Gilmore with Scotland, who should get qualification wrapped up, but you never know with Scotland, do you? Grant Hanley not in that squad because of his groin injury. Hopefully nothing too long term. Ozan Kabak equally hasn't joined up with Turkey because of glandular fever, which kept him out of the Brentford game. Pohetta's with Poland, Pukki with Finland. Again, they've got a massive game. They need to win in Bosnia because they play France in Helsinki in the final game, although France should have already won the group by that point because they play Kazakhstan in their first game. So, and that could be a very big game for Pukki as well, because that would be his 100th cap if he plays in both games. So he'd only be the 5th Finnish player to do that. Of course, we already know he's their record goal scorer. Normann, I've already mentioned. So I think that's all 11. There's a couple of under 21s and things like that. But we'll keep you up to date with all of that as best we can. Of course, we are on a hair trigger for the big news or for anything moving. So keep it locked. PinkUn.com, EDP and Evening News. I always close the pod by saying we will catch up with you very soon. And before I come to that, Pad wants to say something.
Sorry, Dave. I'm trying to. It's like a bit Neville Chamberlain for you history buffs. I've got a piece of paper here. Don't worry, it's nothing exciting, nothing to do with managing.
Mr. Davitt has a statement.
No. I just wanted to take the floor because I've been carrying this around for at least the last 10 podcasts we've recorded, and every time we've done one, I thought, damn, I've forgotten again. Just to give these guys a name check. I don't know if you boys did. You boys get anything in the post? We basically got a letter from the America Canaries. Well, at least there we go. Connor's got it. So I think we might have all, or at least that was. I got the sense was going to be the plan. And it was essentially. Well, I'll read who they are first and foremost. Obviously, they know who they are, but anybody listening to this pod, they are the grassroots social media group of Norwich supporters in North, Central, and South America. From English expats to new fans of the Premier League, we're dedicated to our support of Norwich City Football Club. And the guy who sent me this letter, and I'm assuming Connor as well, is Jeffrey Uack. Apologies for the pronunciation or mispronunciation.
Oh, Jeff, yeah, I met him in Tampa, yeah.
Oh, well, there you go then. So you've met him, and me and Connor seem to have had letter. And basically he sent what I assume is like a sticker, a book to put on a book, what have you. And basically, this is a small token of our gratitude for all the coverage you provide in the PinkUn. Talks about insight. He's obviously got the wrong people, I think, there, but available to us to absorb from across the pond. Many thanks for your hard work, dedication. On the Ball City, we are Premier League. Say we are Premier League, and we're probably going to leave it there by hoping that remains the case with the new manager at the helm. But anyway, hat tip to the America Canaries. Keep it locked to the PinkUn. But if anybody else out there wants to send us any merchandise, feel free.
Yeah, always. And by all means, if you ever want to get in touch with us, then the PinkUn accounts are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you can beat my dad's story of not finding out about Farke until match of the day, then by all means let us know as well. We obviously had a few examples of people who were sort of Sunday and Monday-ish. But if you know someone that managed to get to Tuesday or something and still didn't realise, then do let us know. But for now, as I say, keep it locked on our websites. We will keep you up to date with all the latest as best we can. And as soon as that big news breaks, we will have every angle covered for you. And no doubt we'll be back for another podcast to discuss that in full. But for now, thank you very much for listening. We'll catch up with you very soon.